Hello friends. While we're still here and up and running, I would like to take a minute to talk about our interrelated crises. Because I've gotten a lot of comments on my videos about H5N1 that it is really a coincidence that this is becoming an issue now that the Orange Cheeto is back in office again. And I'd like to stop that nonsense right now. Are we experiencing more zoonotic potential pandemic outbreaks at a faster speed than we used to? 100% we are. Does it have anything to do with politics? No, except that some of it might be a direct relationship to the policies that both parties have chosen to participate in. What's actually happening is a constellation of interrelated crises. So let's talk about exactly how interrelated they are. Those are climate change, human encroachment on animal habitat, and the resulting biodiversity loss from both of those events, and factory farming. Let's dive in. So if your instincts are telling you it feels like there have been way more pandemics or potential pandemics in the last, 30 years than there had seemed to be before, you're not wrong. Animal to human transmission of zoonotic or animal originating illnesses has in fact been increasing substantially. In the last 25 years, we've had SARS, MERS, COVID, H1N1, Ebola, H7N9, and now H5N1. The next question you should ask yourself is, why does that graph seem to be doing this? Well, let's look at those interconnected dots. Here's the growth of the human population relative to the speed of pandemics. Notice that the distance between the Athenian plague, the plague of Justinian, is almost 1,000 years. It's another 800 years before the Black Death comes around. But then that time is cut in half by 400 years for the cholera plague in the 1700s, a series of flu plagues across the 1800s, accumulating in the Spanish influenza, aka the 1918 plague, which also had flare-ups in 1957 and 1968, and caused lots of deaths throughout the 1930s and 1940s. Polio's in there. Between 1918 and 1981, the start of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, the time gets shorter, and between AIDS and SARS, shorter still. SARS and H1N1, less than a decade. H1N1 to MERS, less than 3 years. MERS to Ebola, 2. Do we see the trend yet? The exponential growth in the human population has meant that we've taken up almost half of the habitable land in the entire world, and only a quarter of the land area and a third of the ocean remains relatively undamaged by human activity. Though if we do in fact start mining the sea for minerals for batteries, that last one will change rapidly. And this exponential growth in human population has led to an exponential decline in all other populations. Now, this might seem wild to people who are under 35. But when I was a child in the 90s, driving to visit my grandparents in rural Missouri, the front of the car and the windshield, we would have to wipe that at every gas stop because it would just be covered in bug guts. Because driving through farmlands, driving in the country, you would hit bug after bug after bug. You don't see that anymore. That is because mostly during my lifetime, we've lost 75% of the bug biomass in the world. And we're losing them at about a rate of 9% per decade, which is bad because they break down most of our waste and fertilize most of our food. But that's a tangent. But speaking of food, the way that we now farm mostly animals to feed a population that has grown to this size, especially one in the United States, which is accustomed to eating meat at the rate that it eats it, has led to extremely cramped, cruel, and poised for outbreak farm conditions, where we shove cows together on feedlots like this, or we grow chickens for slaughter in farms like this. You can't have that many living creatures in that small of a space and not have diseases spread like wildfire. And that's where all of these things are starting to collide. Because while many of these pandemic diseases that we've talked about have animal origins, this rise in proximity of humans to animals and animals to each other is leading to a rise of panzoonotic illnesses. Now, what does that mean? Not only do these diseases cause epidemics or pandemics within a species, but they are extremely capable of jumping animal species and causing devastation in multiple species simultaneously. And that poses a dual threat to humans. First, that makes it significantly harder to eliminate a disease within the human population because animal hosts keep that disease in play. So the risk of it spilling back over into humans gets bigger. This has been true with COVID, which now infects cats. It's endemic in the deer population. It's in bats. It's in a lot of other animals, not just us. And H5N1 has been very good at doing that too, and is causing absolute devastation in the animal population with H5N1. It infects hundreds of bird species, almost 100 mammal species. It has killed tens of millions of birds just this year alone, pushing many species to the brink of extinction. It killed 95% of the seal pups during the 23-24 breeding season. 95%. That's estimated to be about 17,000 seal pups. Completely wiped out. An entire generation. Completely gone. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to realize that is not a sustainable path forward. It's also having a huge economic impact, even if it doesn't become a human pandemic. And again, this is interrelation of climate change and human farming and human encroachment. For example, our twin hurricanes that hit the southeast in September and October caused several wild bird populations to have to reposition themselves and fly over the same place twice, thereby increasing the chance of spread between bird populations, since they weren't where they were supposed to be, and between domestic animal populations and bird populations. Another case in point, part of the reason why the majority of the cow herds below San Francisco have been infected in California can be directly tied to climate change. Cases were first detected in the fall and they really picked up in October. And you might want to ask yourself why. At the end of September and into October, the whole of Southern California experienced one of the longest, hottest stretches of weather. In the Bay Area, it was the most consecutive days of over 90-degree temperatures we have ever had. And that long, dry stretch of weather meant that those crowded cows were put into cooling centers where they were even more crowded and being sprayed with water that wasn't treated. Those wet, crowded conditions made spread within cows in a farm happen faster. Those dry, windy conditions meant that the dust from an infected farm could travel farther and infect other dairy farms and bird farms in the same vicinity. It doesn't take long for that to have a drastic effect. Likewise, the wildfires that we have been seeing in the West Coast are changing our bird migration patterns, which is likely going to further spread things like H5N1. None of these are independent crises. They are absolutely interrelated, and they cannot be ignored. They are big existential problems that are not going anywhere, and in fact are only going to get worse unless we start tackling them simultaneously. But that requires paying attention, making difficult choices, potentially painful choices. But our continued existence as a species is going to depend on us making those, because they are synergistic in ways that we cannot fully predict and require deep system-wide thinking to help prevent them in the future, because that's going to be the only path forward. So thank you for tuning into my tangentially related to my normal content. I hope that this was able to connect some dots for everybody. I don't have all the answers, but I can absolutely tell you that this is an interrelated web. And unless we start making some pretty big changes collectively, we're not going to make it to the other side. And I don't know what else to tell you. Stay safe, everyone. Pay attention. Make the changes that you can make so that we still have a world to leave our kids.